Well, good morning and a warm welcome from Emirates Old Trafford, day 2 of the LV County Championship match between Lancashire and Nottinghamshire here on Lancs TV and the BBC Sport website and the app. And as you can see, the covers, I'm afraid, are on. The scene looks quite similar to yesterday, doesn't it? Overcast and grey and wet and a far distant cry from summer, unfortunately. And the morning certainly doesn't look like it's got any chance of improving. But there is a possibility that the afternoon does look a little bit brighter. So let's just confirm what looks pretty inevitable and obvious to everybody, that we do have a delay to the start of the second day. Yet to have the toss, yet to have the teams, yet to see a single ball bowled in this fixture. So we're not going to see anything this morning. Whether we get any play later today remains to be seen. There's a lot of water falling yesterday and again through most of the morning here in Manchester. And we're just in the middle of another kind of rain band which is sweeping up from the southwest. So we had a little bit of a dry period for about 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that. But now we're just in the middle of another band of rain which is sweeping up from the southwest. So as I say, there's nothing imminent in terms of the possibility of this match starting, but there is a suggestion that the forecast is a little bit drier for later in the day. Now, whether that comes quick enough for us to possibly start today remains to be seen. The umpires will have to make that assessment as we get through the early part of the morning and get past lunch and have another look at the radar and potentially see whether or not there's a possibility of any play a little bit later on this afternoon. But as I say, the forecast does look a little bit brighter, so we keep our fingers crossed and we remain optimistic and hopeful that we will get some play potentially later today. It doesn't look hugely hopeful, but as I say, the forecast is a little bit brighter for later on this afternoon. So we've had no play here yet in this fixture. There have been some play elsewhere in Division 1 and Division 2. In fact, I think only this game and the match between Derbyshire and Sussex were the two games that have not had a single ball bowled so far. There have been action and games taking place in Division 1. Just a little bit of a roundup of what's happening elsewhere, with this week games involving Essex against Hampshire, Middlesex against Warwickshire, Somerset against Kent and Surrey against Northamptonshire. Surrey can be crowned county champions this week with a victory in their match, and if results elsewhere go in their favour. I'll just run you through some of the scores because the games are underway between Essex and Hampshire and Middlesex and Warwickshire. So days 2 of those fixtures have started. Essex are 310 for 6 in their first innings against Hampshire. They're able to rally a little bit on the first day because they did lose wickets. They were 96 for 4 at one stage. But they found some runs through Matt Critchley, who's 83 not out, and Adam Rossington, who made 104. So Essex are 310 for 6 against Hampshire in their first innings. The game between Middlesex and Warwickshire, that's underway on day 2. Middlesex, who of course were here last week in that drawn fixture where Lancashire played ever so well, but Middlesex were able to force a draw. Well, they were bowled out for 121 in their first innings on the first day. Josh DeCary's top scoring with 40. And Warwickshire, in reply, have lost plenty of wickets, 76 for 4 in reply to that Middlesex total of 121 all out. With Will Rhodes, their captain, unbeaten on 40. So Warwickshire trail by 45 runs with 6 wickets left. It's basically a must-win match, that, for Middlesex if they're to have any hope of staying in Division 1. And the other game which is in play right now is the game between the First Division leaders, Surrey, who are up against Northamptonshire. This match taking place at the Oval. With runs for Hassan Azad. He made 48 for Northamptonshire in their first innings. Karen Nia is unbeaten on 51, and Northamptonshire are 172 for 6 in their first innings against Surrey. So those matches have started. The games between Essex and Hampshire, Middlesex and Warwickshire, and Surrey against Northamptonshire. A delay here in Manchester. Also a delay to the start of the second day between Somerset and Kent. This match taking place in Taunton. Tom Lammonby making 109 for Somerset in their first innings. They're 214 for 2. Lewis Goldsworthy will resume unbeaten on 70 when play gets underway in Taunton. And the Division 2 games, 3 matches in Division 2, of which none of those have started today. Derbyshire against Sussex. In fact, just like here, they've not yet had the toss, or indeed the teams announced, so they're still waiting for that. Derbyshire-Sussex. Leicestershire against Yorkshire. They did get on yesterday. Yorkshire reaching 155 for 9 in their first innings, with Finley Bean top scoring so far for Yorkshire, making 40. So Yorkshire 155 for 9 in their first innings against Leicestershire. And the other game that got some play yesterday was the match between Worcestershire and Durham. This is taking place at New Road, where Gareth Roderick made 52 and Jake Libby is 46 not out. And Worcestershire are 104 for 1 against Durham. Of course, that's a battle of the top 2 in Division 2. Durham are top and already promoted, and Worcestershire are second and are prime favourites to join them in Division 1 next season. But delays to those matches in Division 2 between Worcestershire and Durham, Leicestershire against Yorkshire and Derbyshire against Sussex. They're playing at the Oval, they're playing at Lords, and they're playing at Chelmsford in the games between Essex and Hampshire, Middlesex and Warwickshire, and Surrey against Northamptonshire. And there's one other thing to mention as well, that in a couple of hours' time, subject to the weather across the Pennines in Leeds, England are playing Ireland. It's the first match of this latest one-day international series, and there are a Lancashire involvement in that, and potentially a Lancashire debut, an England debut rather, for Lancashire's left-arm spinner Tom Hartley. So we wish him all the best if he does get his chance to play today. But Tom Hartley named in the squad, part of the England squad for the first time in his career, and he's in that England squad with his Lancashire teammates Phil Salt and Luke Wood. And that game between England and Ireland is scheduled to start at 12:30. So you're kind of up to date with where we are with games taking place elsewhere. If you're listening to us via the BBC Sport website and app, the live text commentary feed is up and running, and you can follow all the action with Ben, the two Bens and Paul, who are running the live text feed, and there are commentary games for those matches that are in play right now for you to listen to. For viewers on Lancs TV, and for those with us here on the BBC Sport website and that, waiting for play to start here in Manchester, I'm afraid I say nothing to bring you just yet. I'm afraid we've got a little bit of rain coming through once more. Forecast, as I say, is a little bit brighter for later on today. We keep our fingers crossed of some developments over the course of the next couple of hours. But we shall leave you for now. For viewers on Lancs TV, we've got another edition of Beyond the Boundary with Paul Allen.
Hello and welcome along to another edition of Beyond the Boundary. It's a very special edition as well. We're delighted to say that I've got sitting alongside me Mike Brearley, former England captain and, eminent psychoanalyst as well, author. The reason Mike is here, not just to watch Middlesex play Lancashire, Middlesex's old county of course, but to promote his new book, Turning Over the Pebbles, which is a memoir about life and cricket and the mind.
Yes.
So, Michael, really good to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you, Paul.
Emirates Old Trafford has changed dramatically since your time as a player. First impressions?
I remember playing here for Cambridge University against Lancashire, and we were, of course, playing, changing in the pavilion, square onto the pitch as it was, and Slacky Hilton was bowling.
He was fast.
I'd never seen anything like it. I think he twisted an ankle or something before I went into bat, but he was quick. Anyway, that's one memory, the first memory. But I came to Old Trafford a few times. I can't remember ever scoring any runs here. There was quite an enjoyable test match when Ian Botham scored 118 in 86 balls, I see recorded on one of the pavilion walls. And And that was the third of those remarkable matches in 1981. It was your first Test match.
It was.
And you got 6 wickets.
I got
Four
four
wickets, and you scored 50.
Unbelievably.
Wonderful.
I've never scored a 50 in any
Wonderful.
class of, well, in
Wonderful.
any senior class of
Wonderful.
cricket.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you, Mike. I do remember, I obviously remember a lot about that game, but I remember being in awe of you because your reputation went before you as a captain. And I also remember you making me feel remarkably calm at obviously the most nervous time of my career.
Well, I'm glad about that. I probably wasn't calm myself, but it's like a swan paddling under the water.
Well, it was a frantic experience, I think, because of what had gone before. Let's just start a little bit with that,
Yes.
because that 81 series is perhaps the one that you'll be most remembered for as captain, coming back to captain the side. England were 1-0 down, and England then won 3 matches on the trot with you at the helm. Same players, more or less.
Yes.
I mean,
But very, very lucky as well, as great turnaround of Ian Botham, and to some extent Bob Willis too, who got 8 wickets at Headingley, 2 tests before this one. No, but at the time, I think I knew perfectly well that it was a hair's breadth, and it was very lucky that we won. But we did, and it was remarkable, and it captured the imagination of a lot of people in the country at that time.
Coming to the book quickly, it's a memoir.
Yes.
And it is about your life from your time as a schoolboy right the way through university as a lecturer, and then your cricket career, and then post-cricket career as a psychoanalyst. But one thing that struck me in the book was that you said that cricket is a part of me. You didn't mention that any other aspect of your career or life is a part of you, but cricket is a part of you. Why is that so fundamental to you?
Well, I think for one thing, it's the first thing I really remember. Cricket and at that time football was equal. Winter was football, cricket was summer. When I was little, and my dad was a good cricketer. He played for Yorkshire once and Middlesex twice, and both their second 11s. You know, Yorkshire were the best county in the country. He played with Len Hutton and Herbert Sutcliffe in a match against Middlesex, actually. Headley Verity, and Bill Bowes and Compton and Edrich. So it was quite a match, you know. So it got my imagination. I loved it. I wanted to play cricket all the time. When I was about 9, I put it in the book, my mother said to me, if you carry on like this, you'll do nothing but play cricket and football all your life, which is a bit true.
Well, there are worse things to do.
And there were many worse things to do. And so I think it was ingrained in me. You know, my dad was a Yorkshireman. He played in Yorkshire League and for Leeds University and the British universities, and then he played for Yorkshire Seconds and so on. And they all thought about cricket from a point of view of tactics and strategy, as well as about technique and what shots you should play and what shots you shouldn't play.
There's a lovely little bit in the book about your upbringing, or your father's upbringing, really, and the way he approached the game as a serious game.
Yes, that's
no,
right.
no fripperies.
No fripperies.
Had to be played properly.
And straight, you know.
Yeah, play straight.
I mean, straight technically, but straight morally as well, according to the values of the time, really.
And yet you were an innovator in your time at cricket, in many aspects, weren't you?
Well,
you were the first, I think, maybe the second to wear a helmet for a start, or a skull cap, as they were called then.
And within 6 months, everyone was wearing them, except Viv Richards.
Yeah, well, Viv never. I only ever saw Clive Lloyd take a helmet off once when he was facing Sylvester Clarke.
Did he?
And I asked him many years later, so why did he do that? He said, I felt I just needed sharpening up a little.
Oh, did he? Sylvester. He was quite a bowler, wasn't he?
He was rapid, yeah. But interestingly, you obviously, as I said, were an innovator. Fancy fields your father didn't like. I think he said fancy fields or field placings. What do you make of the field placings and the modern game you can't say in general,
Yeah.
but the way the game has evolved.
Well, I think it's evolved quite a bit in the last year and a bit, especially with Ben Stokes joined by Brendan McCullum. And Brendan McCullum, I think, shifted the game on in the mid-1910s, 1913, 15 and beyond, when he captained New Zealand. And I think he did, you mentioned just before we started, the one-day match, 50-over matches. But
in the World Cup in 2015.
Yes, but I think in Test cricket too. And in two ways. One is that he, having been, I think, depressed actually, or low, and losing the point of what cricket was about, and feeling the New Zealand team had done the same thing, he tried to get people back to playing as they had, with the same mentality, similar mentality to what they had played in as a child when they started playing cricket just for love of the game.
Remember the age, remember the innocence with which you played the game.
And then you can, he said, then you can look for what you hope to do and might do, and not be too preoccupied with how things will go wrong. And I think he helped the English team to transform into an attitude that they shared through the whole, they are sharing still through the whole team, the whole squad, of being able to take a few more risks, to go for things in a natural way, be a bit more relaxed about it and so on.
Is that something that you did yourself when you were captain?
Well, I think I did with some people. I think I did with Ian Botham and his batting when he came back, because he'd got, you know, he was very unlucky, you know. He might have had a Stokes, if he'd had a different set of teams to play against, because of his 11 matches as captain, I think it was, 8 or 9 were against the West Indies, who were easily the best team in the world at the time. And then Australia, the other two, they were the next best team, and we were probably the one after that. And, you know, that was really bad luck. But he had lost his form, both as a bowler and as a batsman, during that time. And I think he needed to...
But it's quite... still amazes me that he was at such a low after the Lord's Test when he resigned or was going to be removed, or whichever way it was, both probably. And yet, almost instantly, because it was the next Test match, he became, yet again, this talismanic figure. Did you say anything to him?
Well,
you must have done.
We only met in between those times on the lunchtime or the afternoon, the day before the Test, as you did in those days. And I was a little nervous, you know, how was he going to be? I thought we'd always got on, very different people.
But you'd known him for
5
quite
years,
a while.
4 or 5 years. But I still felt, how bitter was he going to be? How negative would he be about anything? You know, about, was he happy that it was me and not somebody else? I think he was, actually, because he knew me and we got on. And I could give him his head, but sometimes I could just take him off or say, I'm not going to bowl you if you bowl medium pace half volleys, which I did during that match, took him off after 3 overs. And he didn't like it, but we could get through over that. But batting-wise, I think the luck was that it was such a good pitch to bowl on. We let them get 400 in the first innings. We were, when he came into bat, probably 100 for 5 or something like that, or maybe 80, I don't know, I can't remember. And he played a big shot against Dennis Lillee, and it was a good length, just short of a length ball, and Lillee's usual line just outside off stump, going away, and it reared up. He was trying to hit it off the back foot. It reared up, just missed his gloves and his chin, and went through to Rodney Marshall like that. And he looked up to me. I was sitting in the balcony, which was quite close to the pitch in those days, square on, long leg really, but square on. And I sort of said, enjoy yourself, you know, carry on, because on that pitch I knew, probably on any pitch at that time, but on that pitch in particular, he was better off playing all the shots he felt like playing.
And yet I do seem to remember that when he got his 100, there was a camera shot of you, which I've seen subsequently, of you saying, keep going. Basically. But that's the same thing.
It was the same thing, really. I didn't want him to stop playing shots, but I just thought, he's got to 100, and I think it was when Chris Old had come in as well, and how was Chris going to play? He got at 29, he played 27, 29. They put on probably 60 odd, which is also crucial, like your 50, 52 in the first. That was the latest.
That was at Old Trafford.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
Old Trafford.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was so. I did, and I think that's on the BBC programme of highlights of the Test match. That gesture from me, and I was given credit by Richie Benner saying that I was saying "carry on," hitting to Chris Old, but I think I was also saying to Chris Old, you know, keep that left foot, his back foot, somewhere in line with the stumps.
Well, he was. Yes, he was quite good at giving himself a little
giving
room.
himself a little room.
Yeah.
But actually, he did very well as well in that match and in that stand. He also bowled in the second innings. He bowled 7 overs for 10 runs and got Alan Border out just after lunch, and then Ray Bright slogged him for a couple of 4s from straight to square leg. But he'd done a good job too. So,
where did you? How long did it take you to learn your approach to captaincy? Because you also say in the book that captaincy was very important to you in your future career. It wasn't the fact that philosophy or psychoanalysis helped your captaincy. It was much the other way around, really.
At least as much, I agree with you. Well, I think it's that, you know, there are 2 main branches of captaincy. One is tactics and strategy and putting the right people on the right sort of fields and deciding when to declare and all that sort of thing. But the other is something more intangible, which is to do with how do you get the best out of the team, both individually and as a whole. And I suppose it was, I'm not saying I could always do it very well, but it was always an issue, you know, and there were always 1 or 2 people who would be a bit difficult from my point of view in different ways. I would be difficult for them too, by the way. But how did you get the best out of people? And I think one of the lessons that I sort of partly learned, partly from Ray Illingworth talking to Raymond, because I always like to talk to Raymond, but he said about taking John Snow to Australia in 1971 when we won. And he decided that with John Snow, he said to John Snow, look, until the first test, the key bowler, I want you, you're going to do what everyone else does in the way of practice and so on, turn up to the nets and really try and get yourself fully fit. After that time, if all's going well, it's up to you. You tell me when you want to practice, you tell me when you want to play. In other words, to start with, the rules are the same for you as for everyone else. But once we get into the test cricket, and I want you to be fit for test matches, that's what I want, you do it your way. And I admired that. And I think the rest of the team could buy into that he was being treated differently from others. A bit of that was true of Ian, but sometimes with Ian, I had to say to him, no, you've got to bowl before we go and play a match, you know, bowl a bit. And then he'd come and bowl bounces at me in the nets. Amusing himself.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was a rule to himself, but as you say, he needed managing, and you managed him admirably. Do you think you'd enjoy captaining the present-day England side?
Yes.
Under McCullum and Rob Key and what
I think I'd have loved it. I'd have loved it.
Because that seems to be exactly what you're talking about.
Yes,
now.
I'm afraid I couldn't buy into it for myself. But because I still remain tense and uptight.
Well, and you say in the book you were, you know, before your first game of cricket at school, you were sick. You felt sick, too sick to play.
Yes. Yeah.
And also your test match.
The second test match, the first one at Lord's. Was,
But at least you can appreciate how the others feel then, of course.
Well, I think there's something in that. You know, the people who are really the geniuses of the game are not always the best captains, you know, because they haven't had to go through the things that the rest of us have to go through, certainly from time to time. And it's always a bit of a struggle at the top level. I think by the end of my career, I got to feel I belonged in county cricket. You know, I was a good county cricketer. Yeah. I was on the edge of being a test player. I mean, I got selected as a batsman.
Well, he played 39 times.
Yes, but many of them because I was captain.
Yeah.
But still, as a batsman, I'm thinking of. So
because it's interesting to me, and I'm sure to people who want to get to know you or feel they want to get to know you. You were captain for 31 of those 39 tests. Did it ever, not dawn on you perhaps, but did it trouble you that you weren't contributing as a batsman, and how did you equate that, and how did that make you feel compared to the greats who were around you, the Bothams, the Willises, the Boycotts, the Underwoods, etc. Gower, of course, in his pomp. How do you come to terms with that?
Well, sometimes with difficulty, Paul. I mean, there were good things that people said to you. I remember Tony Greig captaining when I was vice captain in India, and the first test match I was in really good form, and it was a good pitch. We won the toss, lovely day, and I ran myself out for 5. And he told me later that match, during the match, that he felt like crying when I ran myself out. You know, so that was kind of a. And Ian Botham would say to me once or twice, I might have scored a slow 20, but the ball was doing a bit, and there were some good bowlers, you know.
So there's this reciprocal feeling of people wanting you to do well, good players wanting you to do well.
And valuing the contribution, even if in ordinary statistical terms it was modest. Well, it was modest, but it was still something. And there were once or twice when I really was in bad form. I mean, there was once after I'd broken my arm, and I came back too soon. That was in Pakistan. I came back too soon the next summer. It was quite a bad break, and anyway, I couldn't, it was not good. And I got to the last test at, I think it was at Nottingham against New Zealand, and I scored 50 against Hadley and New Zealand. And all the team came out on the balcony to applaud, and it was at a time when it was going to be selected for the winter, the team. And that meant a lot to me, you know, because they obviously wanted me to play. And then once in Australia, when I couldn't score a run, I asked Doug Insole and Bob and probably Geoffrey Boycott, and they all said, you know, you've got to keep playing. We want you there. And so that was so I did need some support from people like that.
You mentioned, you talk a bit about your nerves and your approach to cricket. Do you get nervous in other aspects of your life? For instance, when you started as a philosophy lecturer at Newcastle University, you were relatively young and you had time away from the game. And then beginning your psychoanalysis training.
No, I'm afraid I do.
But that's good then.
Well, it's got a good side to it. You've got to be anxious a bit. I mean, even I remember Ian Botham saying to me he was really anxious before a test match until he walked onto the field. But mine didn't stop when I walked onto the field. But, you know, it was his
You
stage.
didn't stop when you went on the field?
No.
I mean, as a batsman or as a
batsman?
captain?
As a captain, I was more confident. I had those doubts that you mentioned, you know. Was I worth a place in the team? Was I wanted by the team? Was I contributing enough in that way to make up for not contributing as much as I'd like as a batsman? But I did, and I can have still. I think psychoanalysis has helped me in this, and cricket too, probably. I can still feel a bit of a panic in the night if something's going to happen that's difficult the next day, giving a paper to a distinguished audience or that sort of thing. Or sometimes as with people you find difficult in your ordinary emotional interactions, whether it's a patient or a player, you know, it can be the same sort of thing. But I hope it's a bit easier than it was.
You talk about, in the book, about obviously the various aspects of your life. And there's one particular part where you almost wonder whether you could have done other things, i.e. stayed in cricket as a coach or a commentator or a writer, and you do write about the game.
Come back to the writing.
Or whether you've explored the path that you wanted to explore. In other words, carry on with your learning, basically, and this profession of psychoanalysis. Well,
I do find psychoanalysis fascinating. You know, it's the whole person. It's men and women. Well, of course, cricket is for women as well, but we didn't
quite have it in our day, did we?
And we didn't play alongside them, of course.
No.
So, and it's the whole person, and it's from childhood on, and that's the point of the matter. Whereas in cricket, it was really, how do you get the best out of people and help them in relation to their cricket? Sometimes that may be helping them in other ways, I remember Steve Waugh saying to me once, I think I put it in the book too, saying that he hoped as captain of Australia to help people to become not only better cricketers but better people. And I think that was a very interesting comment. That I thought so in a way that's the, it covers the whole range of the unconscious and conscious self, the mind, the emotions, the behaviour, the inclinations, the dreams. I think it's suited me very well, actually.
But you do come back to what you most enjoyed about the game and the companionship, the dressing room, the humour, which I think, not you, but we all struggle to come to terms with when we finish playing the game, because it's a 24/7 occupation as a cricketer.
It is.
And I think a lot of players find it very, very difficult in those first years out of the game.
I think so too, and it is difficult. And we have to stop in our 30s or 40 or whatever. I stopped at 40 and start again in something else. And for many people, that's quite difficult. I mean, it wasn't easy for me, but I had something that I was kind of had in mind and was moving towards. So that was quite important.
So
I was lucky.
Well. Yeah, but right place at right time.
Absolutely.
Luck plays a part. Richie Beno, of course, said, don't try captaincy without the luck.
Yes, but don't try captaining it without the 10% of skill, he also said, didn't he?
That is true, yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing about everyone's life, is how much is luck and how much do we create our own luck or make the most of it or the worst of it, So I agree with you, it's a complicated combination.
So, Mike, we're coming towards the end of your time here. Where do you think you've been most happy? Is it in the dressing room, or in the psychoanalyst room, talking to somebody on the couch or chair or whatever?
Well, I think most happy in any obvious sense of the word is when teams have been doing well. I've been doing okay myself. And there's been a great spirit in the team, as there was in that team you joined, and in Middlesex over the last few years of my playing. I think I was as happy as in any sort of work situation that spread to the rest of one's life that I could be. Psychoanalysis is a bit different. It's not so much fun, because people are coming for a serious, usually serious or at least problems in their life and things they want to address, but it's not all misery either. And people can have, jokes can be helpful or humour can be helpful in that too.
But you'll gain gratification from being able to help them, presumably, in the same way as you would get that as a captain of a cricket team, helping individuals to succeed.
And alongside that, there's the satisfaction of seeing something more clearly yourself, whether it's as a batsman, playing the right strokes and building an innings and having a good run with the bat and that sort of thing, or also thinking in a good, clear way with the patient and not being too disrupted in one's thought or in a bad mood or negative.
I know. Well, no, but you do say that through the book, your captaincy was you always felt was positive, and your approach to cricket was always positive, and I think that stands the test of time. It does, certainly. Mike, the book is a really good read. It's a challenging read for me, but it's a lovely memoir.
Thank you.
And I wish you all the success with it.
Yes, and turning over the pebbles is one of the chances of being a psychoanalyst, is you have a chance to look at things a second time round in your life and as the analyst too. And I think that's something that's fascinated me. You look at something and you get a second bite of the cherry, is another phrase one might use. I like the phrase. Can I use one more phrase now before we stop? There was a psychoanalyst who said of one patient, it was fascinating how boring that patient was. And you see, he didn't just stay bored. He was interested. Well, why am I so bored? Is it me? Is it him? Is it what? And if it's him, what's it to do with? So something about that too.
Well, Mike, you've certainly had a fulfilled and varied life, and that's very well portrayed in the book. So thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, Paul.
If you give players the right level of help, you can help players who might have been fringe players become quality players.
Do you see the influence of the way that England have played in the last 6 months drilling down into the county game?
We can't just have a squad of players for Lancashire and expect them to all play for Lancashire all year. I was fairly argumentative as a youngster. I thought...
What do you mean as a youngster?
Did think, not that I didn't believe in coaching. I was always prepared to listen to people I respected.
Where did the spark come from and why did you think you wanted to become a coach?
The concept of being a pro didn't really dawn on me until I was offered a contract. Not frustrated, but I was determined that we could go better than 4th place.
Does that rankle with you, that you never got more of an opportunity to play for England? If somebody had to say what defines Glen Chapel, that last game probably would be it. Hello and welcome along to another edition of Beyond the Boundary. I'm delighted to say that my guest today is somebody who's been synonymous with Lancashire cricket since the early 90s. His connection has been unbreached since 1992. He is one of the county's best ever quick bowlers, taking 985 first-class wickets, captained the side to the county championship victory in 2011 and is now the head coach. It's a very warm welcome to Glen Chapel. Glen, I just get the feeling that with all your enthusiasm and having got to know you pretty well over the last 5 years or so, that you'd still be playing if you could.
Well, I was lucky enough to be able to play for a long time. The body didn't let me down. And I still have a bowl in the nets now and again. I don't think I'm up to standing out in the field and diving around, but yeah, I still enjoy the skill stuff.
But 24 years as a player is a phenomenal span, especially as an opening bowler. What fortified you through all that? Through obviously your early part of your career, it's all said and done, but through the latter part.
Yeah, well, I think in 24 years you change a lot in that time, and your outlook changes. From starting off being surprised that you're a professional cricketer and wondering what you're doing, to going through thinking halfway through I thought I've had a decent career now, but it's going to take a big effort to carry on. And as I played for longer, I seemed to get more and more resolved to carry on and sort of do something that I could be proud of at the end of it.
Jimmy Anderson, no less, said a couple of years ago, he said, "I've never played with anybody who works harder at his game." That's a fantastic testament to your time in the game and the attitude that you put into it.
Yeah, again, I think I realised as I moved through my career that you had to put the right kind of work in. I'm not sure about working harder, but I did work as hard as I deemed necessary. But it became, the work that you do is important. So if it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. But if it's an hour, it's an hour. You need to prepare to play the next game you're going to play and to be able to get through a full season. And there's a lot of things around the edges of being a bowler that you need to pay attention to if you want to stay on the park. And that's just not the normal stuff. It's all the modern stuff that we do to prevent injury, to make certain areas of your body stronger.
Where did all this come from then? Because for a Lancastrian, which you're not because you were born in Skipton, and somebody who's grown up on the border of Lancashire and Yorkshire at Earby, what was your early influence in all this? Were your parents very instrumental in instilling in you a work ethic?
Yeah, well, work ethic, I think so, certainly. Certainly grounded people, but they were both involved in the cricket club down at Earby. Dad was a pro in the leagues, played for many years for Earby, Nelson, Darwin. And we were a family who just spent time at the club, really. I had a lot of friends there, so we were always there playing cricket, whether it be tennis ball, in the nets at night with the men. And in those days you would progress quite early, so I was playing at 6 in the under-12s, I was playing at 11 in the 3rd team, and there were no restrictions on anything, so it was just a life spent playing cricket basically.
Did you play at school?
No, only a couple of games. I think my school was more football. Played 2 games I think at school, won one against another team who didn't play, and then we played against Queggs in Blackburn and got beat by about 200 runs.
So you're very much a product of family, club and the Lancashire age group setup?
Yeah, absolutely. My school were very helpful. They were always keen to let me go to every representative fixture and training thing going. The representative stuff, because I lived on the border of Lancs and Yorkshire, I went to school in Lancashire, which made me qualified for Lancashire schools. But the first instance I remember was our club having winter nets at Burnley, and there was a coach called Jim Kenyon.
Oh yeah.
Who was connected down here. So he brought me down, and that was my first connection to the club.
Jim Kenyon was one of the stalwarts of the coaching setup in Lancashire in the 80s and way before that as well. And he must have brought quite a few young cricketers into Lancashire's books, I would say.
Yeah, there's a lot of players of certainly my era, older and younger, who have good things to say about Jim. So I remember him coaching me in a similar way to what my dad would do, you know, challenging you, can you do this? You know, what about the in-swinger? I want to see 3 out-swingers, all that stuff. So that's good coaching. You know, back in the day when coaching wasn't really a learned thing, it was just experienced cricketers helping lads along the way.
Well, it wasn't an occupation then, was it,
No.
coaching? I mean, I think coaching has only really come into its own as a profession, if you like, probably during your time in the game. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. When I started, we basically had a manager, didn't we? We'd call him coach or manager. And again, he would help us become better at cricket. But a lot of the learnings were from your teammates as well in those days.
So you teammates, who were the biggest influences early in your career, apart from your dad, obviously?
Well, all the fellas I played with at the club. I mean, that was an enjoyable and tough school, you know, a lot of what you'd call sledging and grown-up stuff in the leagues, people falling out with each other, but that, you know, that sort of made you appreciate what playing cricket against adults is like. And then as you move through, I was lucky enough to play above age in age group cricket. So you look at, I played with people like John Crawley, 2 years older, Ronnie Irani, people like that. So you're constantly learning from people who are more advanced, if you like, with more experience. And then coming into Lancashire's team, that was pretty daunting in a way, because certainly early on in my career, I think we had everybody else in the first team had played for England. So we had a whole host of quality cricketers from overseas, as well as, you know, homegrown players, others, Neil Fairbrother. When I started, I think Neil Fairbrother was captain. Then we had Mike Watkinson, others, Graham
Gallian,
Lloyd,
Crawley,
De Freitas, Wasim Akram, obviously a key influence, Peter Martin, Warren Haig. I mean, the list goes on and on.
So how influential were your peers then? Because you didn't play. I hesitate to say this, but like any player who goes on and has a really substantial career, you didn't play many second team games.
No, a handful.
So you're learning on the job, basically.
Yeah, you are. I'd played second team from 16, briefly at 16, then more at 17. Joined the staff on a summer contract in '92. And I think the team was struggling with illness and injury, and
old age.
And old age.
Me.
You were still around,
Yes.
telling us what to do at Crosby one day.
I remember. Yeah. God.
But I'd done well in the second team, and I was whisked off down to Hove to make my debut down there.
And when you came into the first team, it was predominantly as a bowler.
Yeah.
And obviously you were raw. But you would have had some thoughts and ideas about what your main strengths were. What were they?
I think my bowling was quite developed from a young age. I think at 13, 14, I had the skills and the accuracy required, probably better than most at that age. So I was always confident of those areas of my game. The bit I always remember, and it's probably completely different to lads nowadays, is that I didn't have any contact with professional cricket as a youngster, because we lived quite a long way from Old Trafford. There was no thought to come and watch a game here. I think my first game that I watched, I was probably 16. Maybe watched a couple at Headingley when I was 9 or 10. But the concept of being a pro didn't really dawn on me until I was offered a contract. So that was the thing. Different to now, we've got the academy, we've got lads coming through who believe they've a chance to play professional cricket. Didn't really dawn on me till maybe when I went on the under-19s tour with England, and then getting the contract. So it was all pretty quick, and it's like, oh my word,
There's already an element and a theme of being self-taught and self-reliant in your development. Would you say that has carried through now into your coaching mantra, if you like, and your philosophy on coaching?
Well, I keep trying to learn and become more aware of certain things. Certainly as a young player, not that I didn't believe in coaching, we didn't know what it was to that degree. I was always prepared to listen to people I respected, rightly or wrongly. People I thought knew what they were talking about. But at the same time, I was fairly argumentative as a youngster. I thought
What do you mean as a youngster?
I did think I knew best quite a lot of the time. That's something I try my best not to let enter into my coaching theory. And as a coach now, I think where I'm at is that try and constantly make it about the player and the team rather than about yourself. Obviously, we still make mistakes, but I think that's the key. The players know a lot more than you think sometimes. So try and get the knowledge they have out into the open.
Yeah, it's an interesting progression, really, for you as a bowler, coming from where you came from, not having an awful lot of what you would call formal coaching, that you decided that that's where you would go once you were coming towards the end of your playing career. What actually prompted that? Where did the spark come from, and why did you think you wanted to become a coach?
Oh, I think as I got older as a player, probably around 28, at the kind of age, I began to see what good people running teams could do and what they could do for a team. And it's not always about technical coaching. There is a big element of that at certain parts of the year. But it's how a team performs as a unit, and there's a whole load of things that go into that. And I think one thing that teams do now, probably in some ways better than we used to because they've more resources, is they perform day in, day out with energy, and that comes down to all sorts of different things. You know, I think the players I played with early on, given the facilities and the training today, would be superb players. You know, absolutely. But I think if you give players the right level of help, you can help players who might have been fringe players become quality players. So more players come through into the system. The best are still going to be the best, but there are ways you can help, and sometimes that might just be to help them think about their game. And there's a lot of other things that impact on players negatively nowadays. Distractions, more distractions than ever. You know, we spoke about the game constantly because there wasn't the elements of professionalism that there are now. So we were in the bar talking about the game, learning from each other, inadvertently, if you like.
You're the last of a whole long line, I think, of players who used to do that, spend time after the game talking about cricket. And you were very much an individual, a player who led by example. Bowling fast, opening the bowling plenty of overs a day, it's tough work. It really is hard work. You have to go through all sorts of strifes and stresses to be able to perform. So you led by example as a bowler and then as a captain. How does that transfer into coaching now? Because it's much harder to do that.
You can't do it. You can lead by example in the way that you do your job as well as you possibly can, and I think that's the overriding concept, that as a captain and as a bowler, you wanted to be seen as someone who could do the hard yards. However tough it got, you always wanted to set that example. And you had to enjoy it. You know, at the end of the day, I enjoyed that. The only way that I can think right now that transfers into coaching is do your job as well as you can. And that, you know, that's not me bowling 20 overs in the nets to show them I can do that. It's do the right things as a coach.
Do you get frustrated as a coach? Whether it be about tactics, players, attitude, what is the thing that does frustrate you, or do you put those frustrations to one side and concentrate on the good things, if you like?
Well, it's not a perfect world, so you can't walk around saying I don't get frustrated about anything. Players have massive challenges nowadays. The county clubs have huge challenges. The schedule of world cricket has changed massively over the last few years. They're challenges we've got to overcome. We've got to understand what our job is, because we can't just have a squad of players for Lancashire and expect them to all play for Lancashire all year. We're going to be pulled around a bit by different players' schedules, be that international cricket, franchise cricket, tour games during the season. all sorts of things. So we've got to plan accordingly and try and be as strong as we can, day in, day out, all year long. In terms of players' attitude, I try not to get frustrated, because what we do is a lot of work to make sure we've got good people, good lads here, and we have, absolutely. So there's not much frustration there. If there is, you pick it up and you try and get better. But over the course of time, especially when a team's being pulled around, you need people who come into the environment and out of it and come back with energy and enthusiasm, respect for their teammates, and want to do well for the club. And if you've got those, then things tend to run a bit better.
Let's come to that, back to that in a minute. I just want to wind the clock back a little. It's over 10 years now since Lancashire won the county championship. You were captain at the time. There were all sorts of constraints placed upon you then. You didn't have Old Trafford as a base because it was being transformed. The square was being turned round. You'd already been playing the best part of 20 years. And that win, that county championship win, just came out of the blue to those that weren't really associated with Lancashire. How did you formulate that season's plan? Was it down to you? There must have been elements from outside as well. But that was a phenomenal effort to win the county championship then.
So Peter Moores came to the club in 2009. I think we'd finished fourth in both of those years leading up to 2011. But at that moment, the team had theoretically weakened a little bit. We lost some senior players, Stuart Law, people like that. And I think there was an area of naivety. I mean, I was a senior player, but I wasn't a coach yet. But
you had much captaincy experience?
Yes, I'd done the previous 2 years.
Yeah, okay.
So I was into the role then, and I was not frustrated, but I was determined that we could go better than fourth place. And I think there was an attitude around, we just said, right, we're going to win the championship this year. And that's not always the best thing to say, because that can create early issues. If you start losing games, you can go from thinking you're going to do that to being nowhere. But we had a group of young players who were hungry, and I think we just decided to let's challenge ourselves, because there's nothing lost with that. We just said we're going to win the championship. That's our aim, simple as that, and that's what we said. We needed a good start to do that, but fortunately that's what we got.
The final game of the year was down at Taunton. Obviously, you were suffering from all the strains and stresses that bowlers suffer from as they go through a season. You'd got a slightly, I don't know whether it was pulled or torn, or it certainly wasn't torn, ripped, but it wasn't clever, your hamstring. And you just powered on through. I think that sums you up, to be perfectly honest. If somebody had to say what defines Glen Chapel, that last game probably would be it. Would that be fair?
I hope so. I still can't work that game out in terms of my personal injury. I've torn a lot of muscles in my time, and I know what a torn muscle feels like. And I think into about the fourth over on day one, I tore a hamstring to the point where I couldn't walk. So I'm thinking, all right, so I had to go off, get some ice on it, get some strapping on it. And for the rest of the next two sessions, it was just behaving like a properly torn hamstring. So I thought I was done. I think back end of the day, might be remembering this wrong, but back end of the day, we had a point where, there was nothing to lose. So I went back out there, and you can always bowl a little bit, hobble around, but it wasn't much better. I had some incredibly tight strapping on it by Sam, the physio. But as I went on, it sort of eased a bit. It was still tugging, but it eased a bit. But bizarrely, by the end of the game, it was probably 70% right. And
talk about bowling through injuries.
Well,
we talk about that a lot as bowlers.
I don't. Who knows? Because I never got it scanned. Maybe it was me inventing something. Maybe there was nothing there. Maybe it was a weird cramp. Didn't feel
Tension.
like that.
Could have been something like that.
No, I mean, who knows? But yeah. I can't say that. Yeah, I can play with a torn hamstring, because that's obviously not true. But for whatever reason, fortunately, it got better and allowed me to play a part in the game.
You've been, well, would you say that's the pinnacle of your career, winning the county championship in 2011?
In terms of a long-term achievement, because it's, just look at the history around Old Trafford. It's hard to win a championship here for whatever reason. We haven't managed it. Maybe that's a load of different reasons in different years. But to do it with a young team, 16 games I think it was in those days, it takes a collective effort for a long period of time. So I think, yeah, in terms of effort-wise and focus, because it's an achievement over 6 months, it's not just a final.
You've been fortunate enough to play with a number of top-class, maybe the best in the world, cricketers in your time at Lancashire. Two would be Wasim Akram and Murali. There are others as well. Who would you say was not necessarily most influential, but the best you've played alongside?
Well, those two are obviously right up there. I mean, watching Waz bowl was just, it made fielding enjoyable when we didn't enjoy fielding so much. But I'd stand at fine leg watching Warren flying around behind the stumps, and the batters, basically
Clueless.
either petrified or amazed at what's coming down.
Did he teach you much?
Yeah.
Did you ever get to master reverse swing, which he was the well, I suppose he was one of the pioneers of.
Yeah, I think I was decent at it. I wouldn't say master it, because he mastered it, so I didn't do what he did. But I learnt from him, and early on, yeah, it was going against the way it should go, as a reverse swing. But learning what length to bowl with it is quite important sometimes on different surfaces. And he was very influential. He used to be standing at mid-off and say, he used to say, drop your shoulder, hit back of a length, because people used to think you put it up there when it's reversing. Well, he said if you hit back of a length, it tends to look like it does more. Obviously, there's a reverse swinging Yorker that demolishes the stumps, but you don't always have the pace for that, or the batter might be up to that. But a few subtle tactical things he was great with. The other players, well, there's a load of them. I bowled at Stuart Low for a few years, and then
When he was playing for Essex.
so he played for Essex. And in the crazy days when we had a Sunday League game in the middle of a championship game, I'm pretty sure he got 100 first innings, 100 on Sunday, and 100 second innings. So we were pretty pleased when he came and signed for us.
Yeah, he was a phenomenal batter.
What did he average for Lancs? 60 odd, 70?
Yeah.
So, class-wise, in the brilliant Aussie team of that era, in my mind, he was as good.
Only played one test.
One test, 50 odd, not out.
Does that rankle with you that you never got more of an opportunity to play for England?
I always say no, and I can see the reasons why I didn't at certain times. I also think they made a mistake quite a few times, if I'm honest, because I look at the people who've played, and I've no problems with the good players who played a lot of tests. That's absolutely fine. And if I'm honest, I'm quite clear that I wanted to play. If I want to look back on an England career, it wants to be 50 tests. So 2 or 3 wouldn't bother me. That doesn't bother me at all. So way over it now. Not a problem. It's just cricket at the end of the day.
Exactly. Nothing you can do about it now. Suffice to say that you can take great joy from the career you've had at Lancashire, which isn't over yet, quite clearly. Let's just move it forward now, because your playing days are obviously gone, even though you'd quite like to carry on. They've gone, but you've been head coach for a number of years now, and you must still enjoy that challenge. What is it that really sustains you and keeps you going as a head coach?
I think the big thing is I want to see a team go out there and play together and be strong together and win. Obviously, I want to help put together a team full of quality. But it's that idea of building a team to win something, and to know that you've earned it over a period of time. So then every season's quite demanding, but by the time you've had 4 or 5 weeks off, you start to be constantly thinking about what you need to do January, February, March to get ready for the new season. But I think with the club I've been at for so long, I just want to help us bring some success back, because we've now been through a period where if you put our collective results together, I think we'd be the most successful team in the country. We just haven't won. But we need to keep putting ourselves in those positions, playing good cricket all year to give ourselves that chance. But just keep believing that when we keep getting there, we'll be successful. But the overriding thing is to get a squad together who enjoy playing together, and we'll go out there and give 100%.
How does the head coach role differ from being, say, just a bowling coach?
Less time with individual players, and that's the big challenge, is to make sure you spend enough time with the individuals who want that time. You can still coach, and we do, so currently we don't have a specialist full-time batting coach, but as experienced coaches I think we're all feel that we can help in those areas, and obviously last season our batters had an incredible year. But less time spent with individuals, because you're always thinking about what the whole needs.
Yeah. During your time in the game, 30 years, I think we've already touched on this. Coaching has become, it's developed away from the periphery, and I think it probably was on the periphery when you started, to becoming a mainstream function now, where teams they don't just have one coach, they'll have specialist coaches for bowling, batting, spin bowling, fielding, wicket keeping, etc., etc. And the skills within those different coaching elements have become greater and greater. Let's just take bowling, for instance, fast bowling. When you played, started playing, variety and variation wasn't really on the agenda. It was about consistency of performance. Now we're looking at variety in all forms of the game becoming predominant, aren't we? We're looking at bowling, wobble seam. I mean, wobble seam's become a standard ball. I don't know, it used to be, I've missed the seam this time. But, reverse swing has come through all sorts of different adaptations have come into the game in your time. So you are constantly adapting from the old school type of player and coach into very much a modern phenomenon. Has that been difficult?
It's enjoyable, to be honest. So as a player I grew up, as a bowler I grew up certainly with in-swing and out-swing and holding length. They're the key principles to fast bowling in England. Then you'd have bowlers who weren't swing bowlers, they were called seam bowlers, and that might be because they bowled a wobble seam or a very straight seam, but that's a skill in itself. As soon as you tilt the seam in swinging conditions, it will swing. But there's a whole raft of different things now. So, for instance, the skill of a bowler in white ball cricket at the highest level, they have to bowl everything. They have to be able to bowl the old-fashioned Yorker, but they have to be better at it than they used to because the ball's harder now and the batters have practiced hitting the full half volley or the low full toss. You have to cramp for room, you can't give any width. When the batter moves, you have to know whether to follow or to go wide. When you go wide, you have to be able to hold length if that's what the ground dimensions of the pitch need. Slow ball, if you bowl a wide slow ball, you need to be able to bowl, the best will be able to bowl a full one, a length ball, a slow ball. And people watching on TV from the old school will be saying, he's just bowling a load of rubbish. He's all over the place. Slow ball bouncers, all these things. But that's in coaching, it's in players' minds now. So when they're prepared to play against good players, powerful players who can hit it 15 rows back, when you're running into bowl with the right field, which who knows what that is unless you've planned properly, and even then the good players can deal with that sometimes. But you're not just thinking I'm going to take him one side. What's his body shape when he's trying to hit the ball? Will a length ball be better than a short ball? Will a full ball deceive him more? it's unending, never ending. And that's really exciting as a coach, learning these new tactics as you go along.
It's a classic topic, and it's very relevant at the current time, because essentially what we're talking about here is one-day white ball cricket and variation and being able to adapt. But you and I well know that over the last 6 months, with the way England are starting to play red ball cricket under the influence of McCullum and Stokes and Key, that those sort of elements are coming into red ball cricket, nowhere better served than that test in Rawalpindi that England have won on the flattest pitch you would ever wish to see. So my point being, the game continues to evolve, and all for the better in my view. So let's just concentrate on red ball cricket for a minute. Do you see the influence of the way that England have played in the last 6 months drilling down into the county game?
Without question. Already has. I think it's been documented that Brendan doesn't like the term Bazball, so he's not suggesting there's any element to that. But the principles they're playing by is their willingness to lose in order to win. Shake off the fear of losing red ball games, which is inherent in all of us, because a draw was always seen as valuable. When you play in a relegation system, a draw will always be valuable. But how can we get ourselves to think win above all else? And if we lose, fine. So I think that mantra, that idea, is going to influence everybody in the game. Even more importantly, it makes red ball cricket enjoyable, because they're watching, and hopefully the supporters are thinking, yeah, we can take a loss because they're playing such enjoyable cricket, and they will win more than they lose because they're a good team. So without doubt, it's already inspired players. It's made coaches think about the best way forward for their team. You still have to do the best thing for your team. You can't copy someone else's methods. But I think the idea that winning is more important than potentially losing is something we can all learn from.
Are players, batters in particular, going to come to you, do you think, over time and say, red ball cricket, Glenn, I want to play the way that England are playing? It's my way to success. It's my way to absolutely to better myself.
Two things spring to mind there is continuity of selection gives a player a chance to do that. So England are showing openly that they're backing players. That also gives players less chance to get in the team. But if you're going to ask players to take risks, they have to be sported. We want to win games of cricket, so how can we find ways to create space in a game to give yourself a chance to bowl a team out if the pitch is hard work? That's what England did in Rawalpindi. They scored at such a ridiculous rate, they had the time, and eventually they won out. So they're the sort of things that you need to think about. English conditions changed drastically, so in the summer England were playing aggressive cricket on pitches that were doing a little bit, and they were sailing even closer to the wind there because, you know, a couple of pieces of bad luck early on and all of a sudden you've lost wickets. But they were saying, no, we're going to keep going.
Quite a relevant point, this. Can you see, and would you advocate Lancashire playing their red ball cricket in that way?
Well, if you look at the run rates from last season, we scored at quite a bit quicker than we had done previously. And we have players who are erring towards that style of cricket. Luke Wells, for instance. His early career was a traditional opening batter. His strike rate is now one of those along with the England players. He's going out there and trying to boss the game from ball one, taking it on. Keaton had an amazing season. His strike rate as he gets in is going through the roof. So he's taking his game to another level. The captain, Dane, has always been an aggressive player, but even more so this year. So absolutely, but we're going to play how Lancashire want to play, and we're going to decide that. But absolutely, we're looking to win games of cricket, so we'll be trying.
Okay, we're coming towards the final part of this, beyond the boundary. Are you happy with where Lancashire cricket are at the moment, and how do you foresee the short-term short-term future, medium-term future of Lancashire cricket?
Well, if you look at the squad that we have, without any players being away, then we've got a terrific set of players at Lancs, all through the age ranges. We've just taken on 3 new players, one early on in the season, 2 new players, Josh Boyd and Tom Aspinwall, Matthew Hurst. And then I'm doing a little bit of work with the academy, and you see what's coming up. So we'll always have potential pros in our pathway. So absolutely, in terms of resources, player-wise, we're in a good position. And you look at the results over the last couple of seasons: second in the Championship twice, 2 more seconds in one-day trophies. We're right up there in terms of challenging for everything, whilst we've got young players coming through. So it puts a bit of pressure on because there's expectation there, but that's where we want to be, and we want to keep getting better. But we've got the players coming through to do that.
There's no miracle switch that you can click to get to number 1, but that's obviously your ultimate aim, to win trophies.
Yeah, I think one thing you can look at and say, right, unless the weather takes you out of it, to win a championship, if you're the best team, you've got a very good chance. So if you play the best cricket over the course of a season, you've got a very good chance. At the end of the day, in one-day competitions, you've got to win the last one. And you can't always control that, because when it comes down to 1 or 2 runs, you've got to just say, OK, we'll still look at the minute detail and we'll do what we could have done better. But at the end of the day, you've got to win on the day.
Glenn, many thanks for talking to us, and many future successes for you and for Lancashire. Welcome along to this edition of Beyond the Boundary. With me today is one of Lancashire's finest, Neil Harvey Fairbrother, who was a diminutive left-hand middle-order batsman for Lancashire and England through the 80s and 90s, played over 20 years cricket here at Emirates Old Trafford, and was fundamental to Lancashire's one-day successes in those years. Well, Neil, nice to see you. Good of you to come back to the old place. I said Neil Harvey Fairbrother. With those names and those Christian names that you were given by your mother, it was destiny that you would become a cricketer, surely.
Well, I don't know about that. Unbelievable that I ended up a left-hander as well, that's for sure. But I think I did all right, because our 2 favourite cricketers were Neil Harvey and Herbert Sutcliffe. So I think I did all right with my name in the end.
I've been called a Herbert a few times. But I mean, your mother and your father were obviously hugely instrumental in your development, not only as a cricketer, but as a person as well. I mean, what's your earliest memory of sporting interest in the family home?
Well, my dad played club cricket. And as I was growing up, he played at Earlstown, which is Newton-le-Willows. Mm-hmm. So I can remember as a 6-7-year-old lad going down there on a Saturday and a Sunday, and my dad's teammates would throw me balls on the outfield and things like that. Mum did the tees, and that was how our summer weekends were. And that I guess is my first cricket memories. And then because we lived in the village of Grappan Hall, so Grappan Hall Cricket Club was clearly nearer than Earlstown, and Grappan Hall weren't taking youngsters at that time till they were 11 years old, and I think I was sort of 9 or 10, and Dad managed to sort of squeeze me in, and that's the junior section at Grappan Hall.
You weren't just a good schoolboy cricketer, you were a pretty good schoolboy rugby player as well. You played for Cheshire schools in both sports. Which was your favourite growing up?
It was 50-50. You know, I loved rugby, like I obviously still love cricket. And the day that I signed here, Jack Bond offered me a 2-year contract, and he said one of the things is that rugby will have to stop. And actually, it was a sad moment and a sad day. And I played rugby at Lymm Rugby Club, and enjoyed myself immensely up there. I still have good friends from all that time ago through the rugby connections, and I used to go and watch. And
I think it was a good job it stopped. I remember coming to watch you once, and it must have been probably in '82. So you might have just played. You might have been the winter of '82.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got there 5 minutes after the start to see you being helped off the field, and that was the end of that.
Well, it happened a few times on the cricket pitch as well, didn't it?
Oh gosh, did it ever? I remember that. One of your best innings ever, in my opinion, was at Chesterfield.
Yeah.
When you got hit under the chin. Was it Michael Holding?
No, it was Ian Bishop.
Oh, Ian Bishop. Crikey, yeah.
I remember
he was fast.
He was, well, before his back went, he was rapid, wasn't he?
He was.
He was absolutely rapid. And that was a quick wicket that day.
Chesterfield, Queen's Park, was one of the best pitches in the country, wasn't it, at the time? And I remember you got hit under the chin, and you had I think you probably had some stitches in the end. And I remember saying, well, what's the matter with you? Get out there now.
In fact, I think I can remember that as well.
Yeah. Purely.
So I batted with Foxy.
Yeah.
We were 10 or 20 for 2, and I batted with Foxy for 2 or 3 hours. And I remember we were both flailing it around everywhere, with our eyes shut most of the time, I think.
Yes, it was pretty fearsome. Anyway, back to your early years. So rugby had to stop. Yeah. You made your debut here in '82, but prior to that, you'd played for Cheshire Schools and club cricket at Grattan Hall.
Yeah.
Where was the leap between that and getting into Lancashire's?
So I played at Grattan Hall, which was Cheshire. Went to Lim Grammar School, which was Cheshire, although the school didn't play much cricket at all. But that enabled me to play for Cheshire Schools. So that was 13, 15 and 19 back in those days. And I remember doing well as a 16-year-old playing in the under-19s. I did well against Lancashire under-19s. And I don't know if that was a bit of a catalyst for somebody at the club here to say, oh, there's a lad who plays for Cheshire that might be worth looking at.
It's interesting because there's always been a path. I mean, I was a Cheshire lad, played Cheshire Schools, and came here and played. I played in the nets at Easter and had a club and ground game or two. But that you were a contemporary of John Morris, weren't you? Didn't you play together for Cheshire Schools?
Yeah.
And he didn't come here, did he?
No, but he was from. I guess he was from Crewe.
Crewe. Yeah.
Yeah, he was from the Crewe area. So we played all the way through together for Cheshire, and he clearly ended up at Derbyshire. So it was, if you were minor county-ish, it was pot luck, wasn't it, to a degree. There was obviously a little bond between Cheshire and Lancs at the time, which I believe has got stronger as the years have gone on, thankfully. And now there's a bit of a pathway, hopefully, for lads from our area.
When did you become aware of your talent, and did you have the will and the belief that you could make it as a professional sportsman, either as a rugby player or as a cricketer? I
think it's something. I mean, I loved rugby. I loved playing football. I loved cricket. So it was just a hobby, and it was great fun to start with. It was around. We'd done the under-13s and the under-15s, and then I started playing for Cheshire under-19s early, and I immediately did well. So I think then you're 2 years young and you're doing well at under-19s, and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, I might be all right at this. And then got invited down here, like you, played 2 or 3 club and ground games, and then played a second team game, and thought that I needed a new bat to play in the second team. So we went into Stockton Heath, which was a village next to Grattan Hall, and there was a sports shop called Buller's Sports.
Yeah.
And Mum and Dad took me in there, and I bought a Gray Nichols bat for the second team game, and it was about £3 too heavy.
No.
So coming to Old Trafford, it was here, we played Glamorgan seconds, and I couldn't lift the bat up. The ball was hitting the pitch and was quicker than anything I'd ever seen, so I had no chance.
And the combination of the two, the heavy bat and a quick pitch, no,
not good.
Not good. Oh dear. So that was a lesson very quickly and early learned. You used grey nickels in your early days, didn't you?
Yeah, very early.
Then you moved on. But,
yeah.
Interesting. What weight of bat did you use then?
So all the way through my career, it never moved from £2.8. So that was start to finish.
Yeah.
Clearly, through my period, there were people that used lighter and there were people that used heavier. Now, I think the generalisation is that the lads use £2.10, £2.11 bats, but they pick up so well now. The bats are so big and they pick up so well that you pick a bat up and you think it's 2.7, and there's actually that much wood in it that it's heavier.
Here's a speculative question. Do you think you'd have been a different type of player with a modern bat? Because you were very much a batsman who structured his innings around moving the ball around, placing it in gaps, etc., etc. Would you have been tempted to play differently?
Well, you never know, do you? You never know. I do think that when we played, if I didn't hit the ball in the middle, then there was no chance of it going over the boundary. These lads at the moment, they're fitter, bigger, stronger, and they have bigger bats. So if they get half of it, it's still clearing the ropes, isn't it? I never had that feeling. If I didn't middle it, it wasn't going anywhere. That is for sure.
Probably made you the player you were then, actually, because you had to be meticulous in the way that you chose your stroke.
Yeah, I mean, I think I look back at the way I played, and I think early on I tried to hit big balls a lot of the time, and hit my fair share of sixes on this ground. Not like the boys today, obviously. And then I think realised that there was another way to play the game, in one-day cricket especially, and that was to hit gaps and run. And run hard. And that is how my game developed. And then I had a period where I mixed both very well, the hitting and the manoeuvring of a cricket ball, and then latterly I think probably went too far the other way towards the end of my career, where it was just nudging it around into gaps, whereas the game perhaps was going the other way, and that's when boundaries were needed.
Were you aware when you were playing, and you played 85 one-day internationals for England, were you aware that you were developing a style of play that was pioneering? I think you were the first, whether you were called it at the time, but certainly in retrospect, you were the first finisher in the international game.
I don't think at the time you realise that. The one thing that I enjoyed was the run chase. I enjoyed the run chase. I enjoyed being in at the end, and I enjoyed getting this team or the England team over the line if I could. And I got immense satisfaction out of that, and perhaps my game developed on the back of those feelings as well.
You were a great manipulator of the strike though, and also you were excellent at marshalling the lower middle order to chase down totals.
Well, it was great. The lower middle order here for many years was full of strikers of a cricket ball. Which complemented often the way I was playing. And if I thought we needed a boundary or we needed the next over to go for a few, then we all had confidence in each other, and whatever the advice was, the lads were taking it. So, for long periods of time, there was Wasim Akram here, Mike Watkinson here, Warren Hegg here, Phil De Freitas. So all these lads, lower middle order, could all hit the ball into the stand. So when the time came, they were up for the challenge. And we complemented each other well. We knew each other inside out, and we trusted each other.
Let's just go back a bit. 82 you made your debut, but you didn't do anything in your first game. You were called out of nowhere, basically, to
Yeah, I was actually playing for Grappenhall on the Saturday afternoon. I heard the phone go at about 8:45, and Mum came running upstairs into the bedroom and said, "Jack Bond's on the phone, and they want you to go in and play for the first team." And I'd only played 2 or 3 second team games, not scored a run. So I turned around to my mum and said, "Somebody's having a joke with you." And she said, "No, it's Jack Bond." So literally jumped in the car, came here, and you were all in the nets at the back. So I came up into the changing room, was hurriedly getting changed, and it must have been 10:30 because you all came back in. And all of a sudden, I was surrounded by my heroes, people that were playing for England, people that had made the history of this club during the 70s and early 80s, and I was absolutely dumbstruck. Knew nobody. Clive Lloyd was captain that day, and he came over to where I was changing, introduced himself. He talked in this big, deep voice, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
And I didn't understand
And
the
he
word he
mumbled a
was
bit
saying.
as well.
I didn't know what he was saying. And he sat me down in the cinema seats that were in the changing room, and he put his arm round me. And I felt obviously ever so small when he was sat next to me. And the day just went from there, and we fielded all day. And on the way home, I had to stop the car, and I was physically sick on the way home. I think from the nerves of the day and everything that had gone on that day. And then Monday afternoon, when it rained, and then Monday afternoon we chased Kent's total, and I didn't bat, and David Lloyd got 150. And obviously Bumble at the time was at the end of his career,
Yeah.
and he opened the bat and got 150. I remember it being a wonderful knock. There were 2 knocks early that stood out to me. One was that day, and then the first year on the staff, we went down to Horsham, and again, it was only my 3rd or 4th game, and Frank Hayes was at the end of his career as well, and he got a huge 100 at Horsham.
140 odd, I think it was.
Yeah, against Imran,
Yeah.
Garth LaRue,
Yeah.
and that innings also stood out, and those 2 were almost something for me to aim at. And Frank didn't play much after that either.
No, he didn't. It's interesting you say that, because that innings of Frank Hayes came after your debut innings, which
Yes.
didn't occur until 1983. And you made 94 not out against Warwickshire.
I did.
John Abrams was captain.
He was.
And there was, tell us about the scenario there, because 94 not out was a hell of a total.
So, obviously, that was my first knock. My first 4 in first class cricket was a bouncer off a spinner. So, the last over before lunch, Norman Gifford, remember Giff?
Yes.
And he had a penchant for bowling the odd bouncer. So he must have thought, well, let this young lad have it.
Yeah.
And he bowled me a bouncer, and I managed to get it away for 4. That was my first 4 in first class cricket. But later on that day, I think there was an agreement that we would come out at 250.
Bob Willis was captain of Warwickshire.
He was. And I ended up batting with Jack Simmons, and I was 94 not out, and I think we needed 4 to get to 250. And Jack said, "We'll stay on now. It won't matter. We'll stay on till you get 100." And he hit a 6. And that was 250. And I looked round, and Bob Willis was just walking off. You know, he was the opposing captain. He was just walking off. And looked around again and could see John was in the doorway of our changing room. And nothing happened, and everybody just walked off. So I'm 94 not out, and I'm walking off thinking, well, that's a great... I've had a good day here, 94 not out. Got into the changing room, and I remember you and Graham Fowler shouting as I went in, and then Jack came in behind me, and Jack threw his bat across the changing room.
I've never seen Jack as mad.
And Jack threw his, and he said something along the lines, if that's the way you want to play your cricket, you can all go and do one.
Yeah.
And clearly people were having a go at John, saying, why didn't you keep him out there?
It was a strange scenario, because I remember that clearly, and Bob just walked off, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Because Bob, I came to know Bob very, very well, obviously, over the last 20 years or so. And that's exactly the sort of thing he'd do, you know. But there was a bit of mischief in him.
Yeah.
I think as he got older, he probably realised it wasn't the nicest thing to do.
No. Well,
but it affected you less than you probably didn't realise what was going on.
No, I remember that night, we were staying up Hagley Road somewhere, and we went in a Chinese, and there were about 6 of us round one of those big tables, and I can remember that. And I was just pleased that I got double figures.
You have got the best memory for games and occasions, instances, call it what you will, that I have ever come across in a cricketer. You and I played together for the best part of 10 years, and I have very little memory of these games. And you just come out and can, not only can you say who was bowling, you would remember hitting your first 4, but I think inconsequential things. Where's all that come from?
I don't know, but I can't remember yesterday now. But I can still remember, you know, some of those things. And we got our own back on Bob Willis, didn't we? When we won the '84 Bensons. And,
oh yes, we did. And you were out there at the end of that, weren't you? That was a fantastic day. It was our only success, wasn't it, for a period of time.
Yeah, you'd just become a dad, hadn't you?
I had the night before.
Yeah.
Ben was born on the Friday night.
Yeah.
And Bondi, bless his cotton socks, you all went down on a bus, I think, and he waited behind for me and brought me down in the car.
Yeah.
I didn't get to Lord's till 1 o'clock.
Yeah, it was late
in the morning.
Yeah, it was late.
That was a euphoric day. But we had some bad times in the 80s, didn't we? Really.
We weren't very good, were we?
No, we weren't. We kept losing games hand over fist.
You know, 80, 85.
85 was a bad year.
Yeah.
86 was a bad year, apart from getting to the final at Lord's. Just before we go on with that, you've already mentioned Clive. Let's just talk a bit about overseas players at Lancashire. Clive was obviously an adopted Lancashirian and played for the county for 16, 17 years, maybe a bit longer.
Did he play that long?
Yeah, right. 68 to the mid-80s. Missed a couple of years when he was captain with the West Indies, of course, or playing with the West Indies. But we've been fortunate enough to have 2 of the very, very best in Clive and Wasim Akram. How much influence did those 2 guys have on you and the way you played the game?
Clive was, you know, he was left-handed. He was one of my heroes. So to share a changing room with him for 2 or 3 years was fantastic. Clearly, we didn't play like each other because he hit the ball
thunderously
hard.
Yeah.
But it was just, for a young lad to be in the changing room with the West Indies captain, you know, a heroic figure, was fantastic. I mean, that game, the final at Lord's in '86, he got a duck, if you remember.
The first ball.
And he walked on and he walked off, and as he walked off, I was walking in. I remember having tears in my eyes as he was coming off, because, you know, it'd been built up into his final, hadn't it? It was his last games for us. And he got a massive ovation as he walked on. I think the only person in the ground that wasn't clapping him on was Imran Khan that day. And then I followed him in. So, you know, he was a massive idol. But
your demeanour was distinctly different, wasn't it? You were nervous as a kitten before you went into bat, and Clive would regularly be asleep on the floor in the dressing room.
Absolutely. But with Waz, I mean, Waz joined us 88, and, you know, he was a young lad. So we actually, in many respects, he played here to 98?
10 years, yeah.
So in many respects, we almost grew up playing cricket here together. And, you know, it was amazing watching him develop. He came over and he showed the group of bowlers straight away reverse swing. and that clearly helped. It helped us, I would say, immeasurably from an older pro down to the young lads like Ian Austin at the time, who all of a sudden began to understand what reverse swing was, and I think it set us apart from other teams for a little while.
Well, Wasim became fundamental in Lancashire's makeup, quite obviously. He was one of the finest cricketers that's ever walked. But you were fortunate, I think, in being able to play in two separate eras of Lancashire cricket. You played in that team that developed from 87 onwards, and we won a number of one-day trophies through 89, 90. We started in 88 with the Refuge Cup, didn't we? 88, 89, 90, 91, and then there was another incarnation of Lancashire which developed around the mid-90s.
Yeah, I mean, 86, I remember we didn't win a championship game till August because we weren't very good. And I remember Steve O'Shaughnessy grabbing a stump at Leicester and running off like we'd won the NatWest because we'd won a championship game. So that's where our standing was. Then in 87, David Hughes took over as captain, and then Alan Ormrod began to
manager stroke coach, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I was playing as well, but I've still to this day wonder what the difference was and what happened in 87 to make us. We were challenging for the championship. We came second. What was the difference there? What happened?
If you look at the stats, I would imagine that a third of the way through the season we were the same as 86. And then by hook or by crook we won a couple of games. Lads started getting a few runs and a few wickets, and then we got on a roll, and we won. I think we won the last 8 championship games to end up second. And I think Yozza and Alan started putting a bit of discipline into the changing room and a bit of structure on and off the field into the changing room. And then, you know, those lads that had played well in 87 carried on, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And from a personal level, did you start feeling comfortable in 87? Did you ever feel comfortable as a batsman? We know you're nervous. We know you spent time sitting in the back room in the loo and all that sort of stuff. That's just the way you were. But as soon as you walk down the steps, all gone.
Yeah, it was. I don't know why.
I never understood it. To be honest.
No. But you know, as soon as I crossed the white line, all the nerves and the worry went.
So did you start feeling comfortable there, or were you always uncomfortable during the build-up to a match or an innings?
Yeah,
or
I mean, nervous disposition, whatever you want to call it, and that never went away. You know, from the first day to the last here, that never went away. But you get more experienced as time goes on, and you learn to look after yourself, and you know your emotions, and you work from there, don't you?
I suppose so. Were the nerves worse, or was it just always the same, whether you were playing for England in a World Cup or whatever?
No, it was no different, whether it was Grattan Hall under 21s or the World Cup final in 92, it was just the same. And when I walked on the field, it was just the same the other way. So
you've got a phenomenal record in terms of performance and longevity, really. You played in 3 World Cups. That World Cup final in 92, you were playing against one of your best mates in the game, in Wasim, and you very nearly got England over the line.
I mean, it was a...
Would that be one of the greatest and worst days of your cricketing?
Without doubt. Without doubt. You know, at that point we played here for 5 years together, and we'd become great friends, as you say. And that day we actually before knock-ups was lunch, and we actually sat opposite each other at lunch, and then we did our training, we went out, had a net, etc., etc. And then he threw me a few balls into the net. And then the game started. Obviously, he came in and got 50 when they were struggling, got them up to a good score. We were doing all right, and then he came back onto bowl. And we talked about him, you know, and I had to obviously talk about him and what do we do if it starts swinging. And all I could say was make sure you play with a full face. If you're trying to run anything down and it's swinging, it's
playing with half a bat at your peril.
Yeah. So it was full face, and Alan Lamb and I had got a partnership going. He came back on and he bowled 2 Jaffas in 2 balls, bowled around the wicket away swinger to Lammy, knocked his off pole over, and then he bowled a massive in swinger to Chris Lewis and bowled him. So his hat-trick ball was the first ball of the next over, and I was on strike. And he used to have different ways of presenting the ball, and he got to here, and I knew he was going to bowl me an in-swinger on the hat-trick ball. But it was that quick, and it swung that far that it basically hit me on the pad. It was just going down leg stump, and it hit me before I was ready to play it. And I looked up, and he was there, and we just smiled at each other. And that was his hat-trick ball in the World Cup final.
I mean, he was that performance alone sets him apart from most other cricketers. But he was phenomenal. You say he had different ways of presenting the ball. He had a bit of a bunch of flowers, didn't he? When he, you know, and sort of reversed his wrist.
Yeah.
But it all happened so quickly that you couldn't. I fielded it slip all the time, really. But everything happened so quickly. It was just on. The ball was on you. You'd been batting for an hour, and you said the ball.
Just hit me.
Why was that?
I don't know. I mean, that day when he ran in, you knew that people were in trouble. There were days when he not jogging, but he wouldn't be at full speed. But he had such a quick arm and shoulder action that he got it down and through rapidly. But that particular day, you watched footage of him running in during that little spell, and he was charging in. And I can, we played on some hard, fast wickets, didn't we?
We did.
And I can remember you and Warren standing miles away when he was bowling.
Oh yeah, we were a good pitch length back, probably more.
More, I would say.
Yeah, 25 yards back.
Yeah, which was great. But,
I was hoping that Warren would dive in front of me.
He did a few times.
He did.
So, you know, to play with him and to play with Clive was great for all of us. You know, it was fantastic. But, you know, you say Clive became an adopted Lancastrian. Well, so did Waz.
He did.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
And every time he comes back here, you know, it's a joy to see him. And he's so well loved.
I think we've been very fortunate in Lancashire that we've had Clive Farouk as well alongside Clive, who still lives down the road. Wazim, every one of the long-serving and some of the shorter-serving overseas players has always seemed to regard this as home.
Yeah. I mean, back early in my time, Stephen Jeffries.
Oh yeah, Jeff.
Jeff, he was a great man, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
And he only had a couple of years with us, didn't he?
He wasn't dissimilar to Waz when he got it right, was he? Left arm, swung it.
Yeah, he wasn't quite as wasn't quite as sharp, was he?
No.
And then you know, I guess the other standout during my period, he wasn't here that long, was Murali.
Oh, true. Yeah.
And did Murali play 2 or 3 years? And he was another great man. Absolute cricket badger. Came to play for Lancashire and knew what all the county players were, how they played. Incredible the knowledge he had and what he was reading up on just county players. And his first 2 games, his first game for us was at Southport, and I think it was against Warwickshire. He got 16 wickets in the game and we lost. And then we had 2 days off, and the second game he got 14 wickets and we lost. So he'd got 30 wickets in 2 championship games, and the rest of us had done rock all.
It's interesting you say this. Lancashire was hugely successful from '88 till you finished 2002. Certainly in white ball or one-day cricket, as it was then. Why didn't we win the championship?
I don't know.
Because I mean, the size.
It wasn't. It actually wasn't for the lack of trying.
No.
It actually wasn't for the lack of trying. And we got close. You know, I think we were runners up 3 or 4 times. I never quite got over the line.
Well, yeah. I mean, you and I have probably puzzled over this for years. Not much point puzzling over it. We didn't get there.
No, it didn't happen.
We got close, and that was it. You also hold a record, couple of records actually. You've scored more runs on Old Trafford than any other cricketer. Do you know that?
I do know.
Not
that.
first class, but because you've played so many one-day games.
No, I do know that, and it's a nice little.
Is it ever?
It's a nice
phenomenal.
little thing, yeah. But we played on some good wickets. We had the best groundsman in the world. In Peter Marin.
And you had a very good relationship and friendship with Pete, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
You encouraged him, obviously, to make good flat batting pitches. I was looking at Glenn Chappell's record here, who played 20 years, obviously, and he was a fantastic bowler. And he averages 32 here.
Does he?
With the ball, which is high.
Yeah.
Everywhere else he's in the low 20s.
Yeah.
But they were phenomenal pitches, weren't they?
Yeah, but I mean, when Chappie started, 92? You know, that was in the midst of really good wickets. I mean, there were quick wickets, bouncy wickets, but there was no sideways movement.
No.
And once you'd got in, then it was great to play your shots. And I think that period was when we had those 2 different one-day teams. Or different teams, not one-day teams. So we had the team from, let's say, '88 when we won that Refuge Cup to '91. Yeah. And then we had a transition period. And then we came again in '95, '96, '97, '98. And then at the end of '98, Fred came along and was part of that '98 team. And then it went from there. So there were 2 distinct good periods during my time, and there was an overlap of 1 or 2 people.
Let's just move on slightly. And you've been involved in the game for 40 years, and you've just mentioned Fred, Andrew Flintoff, who you managed as well and played alongside. Who are the finest cricketers in that time, both when you were playing and subsequently, because you're fortunate enough to...
What, here? Or...?
No, I think generally. But we'll start with here. Who would you say, if you had to pick one player, and I'm not talking about an overseas player for here, a homegrown Lancashire player, who's the most influential, best player in that 40 years?
I think I have to mention 2 or 3, I think. Yeah. I think there's Mike Atherton. Was a fantastic batsman. So was John Crawley. I thought John was an unbelievable player. So if there's 2 Lancastrian batsmen, I think they're the 2 that just stand out. Skill-wise, Glenn Chappell as a quick bowler. Not just because you sat here, as somebody that got absolutely the most out of their ability, gave everything that they could every day for the club. So I think you 2 as bowlers stand out. For longevity, Mike Watkinson played for 20 years. As an all-rounder, and then latterly bowled some spin as well. So, you know, those are 5 names, and then you can't not mention Warren Hegg as well, who kept wicket for probably, I don't know, 16, 17 years for the club, and was one of the great Lancastrians.
Never saw him drop a catch.
Ever.
No, I didn't. But you must have dropped the odd one, but I never saw him. And we still keep producing players. I mean, as we're both well aware, there is a huge amount of talent around the northwest of England, and that we still produce right up to the present day. We now have Liam Livingston and Saki Mahmood and Matthew Parkinson. George Balderson is another one off. I won't call it a production line, but they're all destined, hopefully, to be top quality Lancashire players.
It shows that the club is set up reasonably well, doesn't it? And you know, I love coming down here now and watching these lads play, and I love 2020 cricket as well.
Yeah, I think you'd have been quite good at that, to be honest.
So I do love watching these lads play. 2020 cricket, just going back to that for a second, I remember there was an extraordinary AGM at Birmingham in, what year would that have been?
What, the PCA?
Yeah, and there was a vote on 2020 cricket. And every county cricketer in the country was in the room, and it was unbelievably split on would 2020 cricket work.
Well, it was treated as a joke, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was early on.
It was just, nobody was really interested, thought it'll be a bit of a passing fad. And now look at it, look where we are.
Well, it's brought the game on in many respects.
Yeah. Talking about bringing the game on, where do you see the game going? I mean, red ball cricket in terms of test cricket seems to be becoming concentrated really between England, Australia, India, and that's about it. The other countries, New Zealand, obviously world test champions, but they're in the process of demolishing South Africa. But where do you see red ball and white ball cricket? Is white ball cricket preeminent now?
I would say white ball cricket has certainly drawn up level with test cricket. And, you know, we now have young pros who are being brought up on one-day cricket, really, aren't we? You know, back in our day, one-day cricket was very much underneath Championship cricket. Now it's certainly, I would say, drawn alongside, and if the governors of the game are not careful, it's going to take over completely.
You say that, and yet I remember our successes in one-day cricket and that instant hit of adrenaline and joy when you seem to outweigh the success and feelings that you had for red ball cricket.
Yeah, I mean, because we won, I think.
Yeah, probably.
We won, and you're right. You know, sat in the changing room after we'd won a close one-day game. It was fantastic, wasn't it? And we'd all be sharing a beer and whatever else. I think the satisfaction of getting I'm only talking from batsman's perspective, the satisfaction of getting 100 in Championship cricket was also immense. But so was the satisfaction of being in at the end to see your team home in a one-day game. And clearly, the grounds were full in those days for one-day cricket as well, weren't they? So, you know, we were playing to big crowds, which always gets the adrenaline going as well. And we certainly enjoyed our successes, didn't we?
We did. You've had a hugely successful career, both on and off the field. Do you have any regrets about your playing career? I would think you'd obviously want to have played more Test matches.
Yeah, you know, there's probably not many people that don't have the odd regret, is there?
No.
You know, there's not many, and clearly, I played, in my mind, only 10 Test matches, and would love to have done better, of course. But then you look at the whole thing and you think, when you were starting out, if you'd have played for 20 years and you'd have played 100 times for England, would you have been satisfied at the start? And of course the answer to that is yes. So I don't think there's much point regretting things, much easier and happier to think back and look at the good things.
Neil, thanks very much for chatting to us, and wish you all the best in the coming years and your still long association with cricket.
Thank you.
Hi and welcome along to Emirates Old Trafford with me, Paul Allott, for another edition of Beyond the Boundary. This week I'm delighted to say that we have got the Managing Director of England Men's Cricket with us in the studio. It's a very warm welcome to Rob Key. Rob, great to see you. I didn't think I'd ever see you in this role, to be perfectly honest, having worked with you in various locations around the country, commentating for Sky. But here you are, and I must say that now we're into July, you've had a very interesting and successful start to your career, or your new career. What was it that finally made you take the role?
I did. Well, you didn't think I'd do this. If you'd have asked me this at Christmas time, I'd have thought, what are you talking about? There's no chance I'd be on the other side of the fence being an administrator. I mean, I loved doing the job I had for Sky. I never thought in a million years. The only reason I thought I wouldn't be doing that is if I'd got sacked, to be honest, or I'd done something, or whatever had happened. So it was sort of after the Ashes, and you know what it's like, we used to do it all the time, and you're always sitting around because we love cricket. And we'd be in the back of the commentary box and be trying to work out, oh, what would you do? You do this, or why don't we do this, or why don't they do that? And then it was sort of Strauss, he'd asked me if I would be interested in the role, and I sort of thought, yeah, I suppose so, but never really thought that anything would come of it. But the thing that I suppose was the defining factor in it all was that now I feel like you've got some skin in the game. Now I feel, when you're on TV, you're coming up with a lot of ideas, but really, you might never know if they work or not. And you're never really sort of under pressure in that regard to see if your views have any meaning or if they're right. And what I felt is that on this side of the fence, you're going to be tested, it's going to be a challenge, but also you've got a chance to do some good for English cricket. And I suppose that was the overriding factor, really. It was just to see if I could do any good in the game, if I could actually help out on that side of it.
Was there a deep breath moment or a gulp when you actually realised, I am actually doing this job now, so now I've got to really perform and I've got to put those thoughts that I have into action, into practice?
I think when I was on the train that first day, because working in TV again, there's a lot of time you're very, very busy. There's a lot of time when you're off as well. And then all of a sudden I thought, hang up, I'm going to be sort of flat out now. And I was on the train from Canterbury or Ashford to London on that first day, just after Easter, and I'd sort of said to Tom Harrison, yeah, I'll do it. I'll start on Tuesday. That was the Thursday I said I'd do it. So 4 or 5 days later, I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing this now. And then you sort of go into Lords and you're getting, right, this is how it all works. And there was no one really in because either they're hybrid working or people are on leave for Easter. And I remember thinking, do you know what? I've no idea what this job actually is. But the greatest thing, I suppose, is the position that England are in, where Ashley Giles, Chris Silverwood, Graham Thorpe were no longer there. There was no national selector. So it was very clear, actually. It didn't really matter. All the administrative side of stuff I didn't have to worry about at that point, because I had to find coaches, find a captain, and then still we're looking for a selector, but I'll get round to that. So there was a very sort of clear focus on what I had to do. So it wasn't too bad.
No, and the best point, I suppose, or perhaps the worst point, depends how you look at it, was that you were starting, as you've said, with a clean slate, but you were starting with England at a very low position in red ball cricket because they'd had a horrendous winter, as you've said, lost the higher ranking individuals, either had been removed before you came along, and you had no captain. So from your point of view, the only way is up.
Well, and that was the same actually when we're interviewing coaches, because what we didn't do was say, right, we think you're going to be white ball, you're going to be red ball. We just sort of asked the field, and people obviously applied for the job, and so.
Well, sorry for interrupting, but you say that now because it's pretty self-evident that's. But did you really, truly and honestly go in with a completely open mind? And we'll talk specifically about Brendan McCullum, because he had no pedigree as a red ball coach. He didn't have much pedigree as a coach. He'd coached in T20 franchises. So you say that now, but really, did you honestly think, I'm going to walk out of this room and Brendan McCullum's going to be my red ball coach?
Well, very early on, I thought that Brendan McCullum was one of the front runners for me. You know, forget about what everyone else thought. I always thought Brendan McCullum, but even before I was doing this job, I always thought, and I knew him a little bit, not a lot actually. We'd done a bit of commentary together, and I'd watched and I'd listened to the Cowdrey lecture, and I'd watched what New Zealand did. And all you ever really want, I think, in anything, is you want people who are aligned to your philosophy and the way you think, and the way that you think the game should be played. And I was very clear on that, and that's what I wanted. And then you sit down and you interview, and there's loads of interviews we did with lots of different people, and you sort of work out who's most attuned to what you think. Because if you don't have that alignment in anything, then there's real trouble. I think that's where problems come. If you have a coach and captain who aren't aligned, if you have a managing director who's not aligned, if there's someone who has a different way of doing things. And that doesn't mean you can't challenge each other and have disagreements. That's not it at all. But your basic philosophy is the same. And that's what Brendan McCullum had. I had two choices, I saw it. I either had the England team in Test cricket needed someone who was going to be really tough on them, really hard, be like a drill sergeant, who was going to give no quarter, or they needed someone who was going to try and take the pressure off and try and get the best out of them in that way. Not by being soft on them, because actually Brendan McCullum takes no quarter at all. If there's anything that he's not happy with, then he's going to make sure he will pull those people up on it. But it was about how do you get the best out of these people, and that was my view. And that's when I spoke with Brendan, that's exactly how he saw it as well. And that was my sort of theory. I felt that England cricketers had a lot of people, and this is our culture, telling them what you can't do. Oh, I'll be careful of this. Don't do that. Oh, you can't do that. The problem is that's not particularly inspiring. And Brendan McCullum is the opposite of that. He sort of tries to broaden your horizons to what you can do.
So you had this debonair, dashing blueprint whirring around in your mind, thinking, this is really the way I want English red ball cricket to go. And Brendan McCullum was the man that sparked that for you? Or did you spark it and see him as being the ideal, well, he can't be a catalyst, but innovator, if you like?
Well, yeah, he's the one. The only thing I would say, and that's why both of us, Brendan and myself, I'm against it at all, but we don't use the Bazball comment, because what it's not, to me, you said it there, it is not about just playing shots and being aggressive. It's actually, how do you get seriously talented cricketers to make the most? You just get out of their way a little bit and you try and free them up. In a world now where there are so many people telling you what you can't do, whether that's in whatever you do, whether you're in politics or anything, and it's in our culture a bit, where I found it actually really fascinating. So we played against New Zealand in a manner, in a style, which actually Joe Root wasn't slogging. Johnny Bairstow, people, they haven't been slogging in that regard.
You could have lost a couple of those games just as easily as you've ended up winning them.
Absolutely.
Let's be realistic about it.
Absolutely. But it's not about just going out there and being ultra aggressive. And what I found really interesting was that, so we won against New Zealand, and then straight away I was like, yeah, but that won't work against India. And it won't work against.
Who was telling you that?
No, in the media. You sort of read and everything, you know. And but that's what I think we do. That's what I do.
They're going to get their comeuppance. It's all going to go wrong.
Which there's every chance that might happen. But why are we getting so far ahead of ourselves? Let's concentrate and focus on what we can control now, today, which is very much Brendan and Stokes' thing. It's like, let's go out and entertain people today, not worry about the future. And it's the same thing, you know, we've got our plans in mind, and there's a hell of a lot of thought that goes into what these guys have done. And it's the same thing, you know, and then it's like we beat India, and it's like, now it's, yeah, but this won't work against Australia. And it's like, no, okay, it might not, but that's not an inspiring message to give. That's fine for everyone else to be talking about that. But in our dressing room, we've got to be talking about what people can do, how you can succeed, what is possible, not living in this world that we do a bit of, oh yeah, but you can't do this. Yeah, but you can't hit on the up. You can't do that to so-and-so. It's like, all right, guys, yeah, we know that.
Excuse the pun then. What is the key to exploring this self-expression for the players? Because it's the same players that were played through the winter in a completely different environment, obviously, but they've been allowed to come out and express themselves. How have you managed to turn that?
Well, what I would say is that's my theory. How Brendan and Stokesy have done it really is the key, and it's little things. It's how do you give people confidence? The game, as you know, as everyone who's played any sport knows, we're different players when we're confident. You know, look at the white ball side here. We've had a tough time against tough oppositions, you know, but they're just lacking that little bit of confidence. But that will come back, and they'll fly again because there's some seriously good players in that. And I watched, so it's the language and the terminology that's used in the dressing room from them. It's not a negative, you know, oh, be careful of this, watch out for that, don't do this on here. And it's little things really, like Alex Lees, for example, who had played fairly in a stodgy manner in the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. And he got 20 odd in the second innings at Lord's. And Joe Root had played brilliantly. Joe Root had won the game with a fantastic 100. You know, and a game that was in the balance, and Ben Folkes had played really well. So it was obvious that those guys had been the standouts. But Stokes, he sort of made a real point with Alex Lees in the dressing room afterwards, and just like, Alex, the way you went and played there, that intent you showed, that's what we want. That's the best I've ever seen you play for England. So they're giving full clarity on how they want someone to play, which actually, if you look at it, at times, when I was playing, we lived in a world where coaches were constantly saying, don't play that shot. You know, if you look to leave, you know, just don't play outside off stump, just leave that ball. But when you do that, the best way, as we all know, to do that is to think positively about it, to look to score and then leave. Mm. And it's that sort of thing that they've been talking about. And the same with Johnny, who actually had played a big shot at Lord's in the second innings. He came out playing, shot a ball, and he got out, sort of drove a couple, then he went once more and he got bowled. Now, a lot of people would have actually said, what are you doing there? That was the last ball of his spell. Switch on. You know, why don't you think about that? Why did you do that? Don't do that again. Whereas actually what they did, they turned and said, the way you played there, that's what we're about. There's more of that. So whether they thought that was the right thing he did there or not, but actually the next time, how much more confidence do you feel with that? And it's those things. And the same with the ball to Jimmy Brody. It's not...
So the news here from Emirates Old Trafford on Lancs TV is that play has been abandoned for the day. Those covers have not been removed all day. In fact, they've been there for about 3 days now, I think, in total. The forecast was and is a little brighter for the afternoon, but it's just not clearing up quickly enough for the ground staff to get out there and to start the mopping up process, remove the surface water, try and drain the outfield, try and get it ready for play in any possible time frame for us to get some cricket today. The outfield actually is quite wet, and unfortunately that's standing surface water in little puddles around the outfield. You can see quite a lot of the water on the covers, can't you? That a lot has fallen, and at the minute it still continues to fall. So with that in mind, the umpires just shortly after lunch calling time on this day's play. Not a single ball. We'll try again tomorrow. I've got some very exciting news. The forecast is a bit better tomorrow morning, so we might even get a little bit of play tomorrow. So fingers crossed we'll have some action for you tomorrow morning from about 10:30. But from everybody here, the whole crew on Lancs TV, fingers crossed for better news tomorrow. But I'm afraid the day has been abandoned.